Time is a flat circle, a serpent devouring its own tail, and Azeroth is the key to shaping the fate of the cosmos. Today we ask the questions, who are the makers of legend? What exactly did Sylvanas mean by the Shadowlands are not at all what they seem? And to echo Iridikron, haven't you questioned why the Titans preserve this timeline? Strap in as we break down how this all connects through one mind-blowingly simple concept, the Bootstrap paradox. Simply put, this is a time travel paradox that occurs when an object, event, or even information becomes its own cause of origin and creates an infinite loop with that subject. But let's use an example from Warcraft canon that lays out the Bootstrap paradox perfectly. In the War of the Ancients novel trilogy, when Crassus and Ronin travel 10,000 years into the past just before the Sundering, Crassus speaks the name Deathwing to the dragon aspects before this name had yet existed. The aspects don't yet recognize this name, but surely enough, as they witness Neltharion's fall, they too decide that Deathwing is indeed a fitting moniker. So, if Crassus originally learned that name from the aspects during his lifetime, and the aspects now learned it from Crassus, who truly invented the name? Nobody? That's actually right. The very name Deathwing no longer has a natural origin in the timeline. It is a closed loop, an anomaly of the paradox, what theoretical physicists call a Djinn particle, an object or piece of information that exists in a closed time loop, having no discernible origin or creator, as it is its own cause and effect. In the seamless yet inconsistent threads of time, Crassus's memory of the name Deathwing is now the only traceable source of the name. This Bootstrap paradox will serve as the frame of reference for us to lay out one delicate way where the timeless mysteries of the first ones and the Titans all connect. No retcons required. Before we start, I want you to imagine this with me. If the name Deathwing can become a paradox and create a closed causal time loop, could Azeroth itself also be a Djinn particle, locked in its own eternal loop? Imagine a scenario where Azeroth was made the location and power source for a sort of time machine. Wondrous tools left behind by the makers to be repeatedly rediscovered by their earlier selves, reignited and used to rule over time itself for an eternity. Today, we'll explore this concept beginning with the ancient titan Aman'Thul, his dictation of the one true timeline, his keeper Odyn, his dragon aspect of choice, and closing with Medivh's promise to end the cycle. Nobody knows when or why the first titan awoke, but legend holds his name was Aman'Thul. We begin this enigmatic titan's journey in Chronicle Volume 1, where we learn of his lonely search for more beings like himself out there in the great dark beyond. Eventually, Aman'Thul finds more of his kind, and together these titans take sacred oaths to protect life whenever possible, setting out to nurture any remaining world souls. More recently, we learned from Arcadis that the Pantheon's mission was also fueled by the hope that they would find the Prime World Soul. And in Dragonflight, Titan Keeper Odyn details another big piece of the puzzle, admitting, quote,
"Mortals could not conceive of the wonders that the Makers granted to the Titans in Zereth Ordis."
To many, Odin's edict disproves that the Titans could even be the first ones. But for us, today, it's a keystone. And using it, we're going to build the arch that bridges who the Makers really are, where Zereth Ordis likely is, and how Aman'Thul even acquired his wondrous powers in the first place. Really quick addition for those who didn't know, before Shadowlands and Dragonflight, the term the Makers had only ever been used in regards to the Titans. It's not until Zovaal mentions them, and Odyn after, that a separation is made between the two for the first time ever. Now back to it. For if the Makers did grant wonders to the Titans, we have to look at the greatest wonder that Aman'Thul ever wielded, his mastery over time. And by extension, the power bestowed upon his dragon aspect to preserve it. After the defeat of Galakrond, the Titans rewarded Tyr's proto-drake allies by ascending them into the dragon aspects we know, and each of them were blessed with unique powers. It is said that Aman'Thul gifted one of his many abilities, the mastery over time, to Nozdormu, saying,
"Unto you is charged the great task of keeping the purity of time. Know that there is only one true timeline, though there are those who would doubt it otherwise. You must protect it, for without the truth of time as it is meant to unfold, more will be lost than you could possibly imagine. The fabric of reality will unravel, for nothing can transpire without time."
And since that day, Nozdormu has been burdened to hold together the flow of time, as dictated by his Titan master. But that was millennia ago, and in Cataclysm, then Dragonflight, we saw Nozdormu both lose and, more importantly, regain the sands of time, receiving a second blessing from Azeroth. So I ask you, was it ever truly Aman'Thul that had the ability to charge Nozdormu with his powers over time? Or was the Prime World Soul always the true source of a borrowed power? Since Azeroth can bless Nozdormu again, what does this reveal to us about the World Soul's own wondrous power to shape the fate of time? Could the goddess's new blessing rival Aman'Thul's charge to guard the one true timeline? And if Azeroth has always had this timeless potential, what does that tell us about the forges and machines powered by her World Soul? Such as the First One's Heart of Eternity, or even this infamous Zereth Ordis that Odyn spoke of. In the finale of Shadowlands, the jailer found his way through Zereth Mortis and into the sepulchre of the First Ones. There, he took the portal to a separate, central, and different cosmic space, the Heart of Eternity. Zovaal activated the Machine of Origination there and began to siphon the World Soul of Azeroth through the Zereth network. The forges lit for his new cosmos. At the core of that mechanical wonder, we see a globe depicting Azeroth, the clear source of the machine's power, harnessed as the center point of a manifold between each of the Zereths, Zereth Ordis included. And here is where our Bootstrap paradox comes full circle. I propose that the Heart of Eternity and the Zereth realm machines of the First Ones are the Jinn particles of our equation, the wonders left behind by the Maker's ultimate victory over time. Just like Deathwing's name, the wonders of the Zereths no longer have a natural origin in the one true timeline. They exist in a closed time loop, decided long ago by the first incarnation of the Titan Pantheon, who successfully found and subjugated the Prime World Soul. To Iridikron's query, why do the Titans preserve this timeline? I say, because the Titans' preferred timeline, oh so guarded by the Bronze Dragons, is the one where they've already succeeded, and Azeroth is but the power slave for their eternal conquest. What the Jailer attempted in 9.2 had already been accomplished in the name of order, before the universe as we know it began. What we in the Titans' Keepers know of as the First Ones are only the remnants of memory. A legend of an infinite pattern written and drawn to ensure that the cycle endures. A writhing, timeless serpent forced to devour its own tail until eternity's end. So, where exactly is this Zereth Ordis that the Titans are said to have discovered? Well, instead of imagining a distant world, think about Azeroth as a cosmic nesting doll, with hidden, layered dimensions folded beneath the earth of the world soul, just like Harandar. Harandar is said to be nowhere in particular, and yet evidently it is technically underground, in a mystical realm below with the roots of the world trees meeting at the central cradle and den. The Emerald Dream adjacent realm of Harandar serves as a parallel to the Heart of Eternity that we saw in Shadowlands, where the roots and trees can be likened to the separate Zereth pylons and portals around the Machine of Origination, and the now bereft cradle likened to the heart of the Zereths, powered by the Prime World Soul. This allows us to see how the First One's machinery and the Zereths aren't necessarily cosmically distant realms, but akin to Harandar, are nearer to the source, protecting or imprisoning the vulnerable world soul where it slumbers, not extracting it elsewhere. Since our connection to Azeroth seems to allow us to access the First One's portals and shrines across the Shadowlands, then I'd argue that the origins and locus of the Zereth realms are also tethered to the World Soul, and the Titans discovered these hidden realms when they ordered Azeroth. This would pair well with Azeroth, not just Aman'Thul, being the source of Nozdormu's blessing as the aspect of time. And perhaps the greatest wonder granted by the Makers was truly stolen from the Prime World Soul. And ever since, the Titans and their keepers have been preserving this one true timeline. Now you might be thinking, if the flow of time has been decided from the beginning, what could we possibly do? What's different this time? Well, like Jaina and Thrall said, we are. This is what Iridikron wants us to realize, because he trusts that we can actually do something about it, and it's why he invites us to ask that vital question. But to wrap our heads around our role in this, we have to challenge ourselves to perceive time just as the Titans do. And that begs the question, why allow all of the tragedies? The Void, the Burning Crusade? Indeed, even the Legion and the Old Gods are just part of the price of victory. The sacrifices necessary to safeguard their closed loop and forever protect life. A bloody toll paid by mortals for the sake of their grand design. And that's because mortals are the crux of their plan, and they can't do it without us. For example, take Lady Elisande from Legion. As we face her in the Nighthold, she scries through the eye of Aman'Thul in an attempt to find the timeline where she wins. However, even this pillar of creation cannot show Elisande the victory she seeks, and the indomitable heroes of Azeroth vanquish the Grand Magistress again and again, and again. Because even Aman'Thul is not truly omniscient. He can only envision a Titan victory as long as we comply with his foresight and planning. And how do the Titans ensure such perfect compliance? Well, as they so kindly put it, ordering the cosmos, and spoon-feeding us narratives to ensure their prized one true timeline endures. The timeline where Azeroth's mortal champions willingly or unknowingly aid the Pantheon in their abuse of the World Soul's power and allow the First One's cycle to continue. Through edicts and oaths, prophecies and fates, we are bound to this subtle servitude. But Azeroth's will, and the will of her champions, is only limited by what they believe. And that's exactly why we are the shapers of fate. For as we learned in the Shadowlands, time and fate are so intertwined. This is where the Shadowlands' darker purpose becomes clear. As Odyn's edicts famously state,
Life is chaos. It must be controlled.
but to control life completely, you must also control their spirits in death. Back in developer previews, we were told that the Shadowlands manages just one outcome of many endless threads that make up the time stream of a character. Take Garrosh Hellscream, for example. There are timelines where Garrosh is a hero, a loathing wretch, a monster, or a leader, all of which we see manifested in our Garrosh Prime at one time or another. Yet in the Shadowlands, it is our Garrosh whose soul is judged and sent to Revendreth, as is the case with many legacy characters we see in the Shadowlands. Among them being Thrall's mother, Draka, who is once again from our one true timeline. Denizens of the Shadowlands will say, time is not a construct of death, feigning unfamiliarity with the concept, only they call it by another name, fate. Fates that are judged by their actions in the one true timeline, and not alternatives. Fate and time are inextricably linked, and the Shadowlands is reliant on both, because as proven by Elasan's struggle, if we defy time, we will define time. For the one true timeline is not a loop that is truly preordained, but safeguarded and imposed through methods in life and in death. And who by? Well, who else but the first ones? A name so bold it reeks of the very hubris attributed to the Titans, who are criticized for their habit of claiming they are the creators of that which they have only reforged. Beyond harvesting anima, the Shadowlands serves a darker purpose for the sake of the timeline: isolation. Pure, natural ancestral communion is a massive threat to the Maker's grand design, for if the mystics of today could speak to the oldest souls, the patterns of oppression throughout the ages would reveal themselves. So Oribos is their calculated solution, a funnel catching threads from the loom of time and caging the dead, severing the living from the memory of the past. The Makers twisted time into a prison and called their wonder Eternity. And that's why Zovaal tried to end it, to remake the flawed design and shatter the cycle. In the Sylvanas novel, we read that during his aeons as the Arbiter, judging every mortal soul that funneled out of the one true timeline, Zovaal realized a terrifying truth. He says to Sylvanas, quote,
From the moment they drew their first breath until they exhaled their last, the choice was never theirs.
Mortals were, quote, fragile beings, left to the fickle whims of fate. He continued,
Most deny it, a few eventually accept it, but no one can escape it. Because escape has never been a part of the Maker's grand design. No one escapes the Maw or any of the infinite afterlives forged to bind mortal souls. From its conception to execution, and throughout all that has been and is, the design is gravely, cruelly, and worst of all, indifferently flawed.
When Zovaal rebelled against this flawed design, the Pantheon of Death replaced him. As he tells Sylvanas, they took the essence of his power and fashioned a new Arbiter, one without a will to defy the grand design.
Together, we will show every soul that both their lives and the eternity that awaits them are prisons. And we will bring them true freedom.
Where the jailer failed was in trying to dominate the goddess when what she needs is liberation. Because when the flow of time has been rigged from the get-go, what can one do to fix it but break time itself and start anew? This is what Iridikron and our heroes are closer than ever to achieving, bringing the Titans' one true timeline to a thundering halt and prying this world from their grasp once and for all. To quote the infinite dragon Aeonis, "The time has come to shatter this clockwork universe forever. Let us no longer be slaves of the hourglass." So, which is it? A clock or an hourglass? We'll close out with a fireside chat between Khadgar and Medivh from the story The Last Guardian that tackles just that. Upon his first arrival to Karazhan, the young apprentice Khadgar experienced visions of a world with red skies, fighting orcs before he had ever even encountered them. He asks Medivh what these visions are, and their conversation takes a turn when Medivh makes a bizarre comment about the origins of Karazhan's magical potency, sharing, quote, "I'm just saying, there are places of power which for some reason or another become the seats of great power. One such location is here in the Red Ridge Mountains. Once long ago, something powerful exploded here, carving out the valley and weakening the reality around it." "And that's why you sought it out," prompted Khadgar. "There was an explosion that created this place of magical power. You then came." Medivh shook his head, but instead said, "That's all true if you look at it in a linear fashion. But what happens if the explosion occurred because I would eventually come here, and the place needed to be ready for me?" Khadgar's face knitted. "But things don't happen like that." "In the normal world, no, they do not," said Medivh. "But magic is the art of circumventing the normal." "But for that to happen to the area to be prepared for you," started Khadgar. "The world would have to be very different than it seems, which it truly is, after all," answered Medivh. And so Medivh begins to lay out two analogies: time as a clock and time as an hourglass. Medivh explains how a mechanical clock is carefully constructed by its maker, knowing each step that the hands will take before the clock begins ticking. Every time the clock finishes its rotation, it repeats exactly as before, as it's designed to. Same beginning, same middle, same outcome. An hourglass, on the other hand, is a process of less predictable events when restarted. Medivh proposes that if you numbered every grain of sand that passed through the funnel, that even though they're all in the same end zone together, a careful inspection would reveal that every time the order in which the grains passed through would be different. The process of time as an hourglass allows for all kinds of mysterious outcomes along the way. Each grain of sand a being, a soul, a moment, or a memory. So Medivh wraps his point about Karazhan's power into the fold, likening the tower to an hourglass. Khadgar's visions are the grains of sand, slipping through the crooked floorboards in the fabric of the universe. Concluding the study of visions and time, Medivh speaks to a hopeful sentiment that foreshadows his timely return in The Last Titan. Were the tower a clock, the visions would move regularly and be easily explained. But since the tower is an hourglass, then they don't. They move at their own speed and defy us to explain their chaotic nature. Medivh leaned back in his chair, which I, for one, am quite comfortable with. I could never really favor an orderly, well-planned universe. And lastly, in his specter form, Medivh leaves the grizzled Khadgar with a promise. Quote, "As long as there are guardians, there is order. And as long as there is order, the parts are there to be played. Decisions made millennia ago set both your path and mine. It is part of the greater cycle, one that has held us all in its sway. Khadgar craned his head upward. Perhaps there should not be guardians then, if this has been the price. Agreed, said Medivh. But for the moment, for your moment, we must all play our part. We must all pay this price. And then, when we have the chance, we will start anew. And with that, heroes, we have a visible horizon, a foreseeable future after the last Titan, where the world of Warcraft is unchained from the clutching clockwork hands of fate forever, where the loom of time is demolished, and our destinies are finally, truly our own. My name is Xaxxas. Your time is precious, and it's my honor to have you join me on this mythical deep dive. Please share your thoughts and comments too. What do you think about this solution? Does this Bootstrap paradox elegantly and simply solve the first one's Titan debate? Or is this overcomplicating a touchy subject, and timeline shenanigans should be left off the table? Get typing. And remember, folks, you are the resistance to the Titan's soul matrix.